bogus information. This is Louis Grossman. And what's interesting is that some of the other things, this is his puppy experiment, which I think was just lovely, poor dog, where he was trying to prove that an organism could get into the bloodstream any which way. And actually, when you look at the article he wrote, the only place that it was it didn't really, it was a joke. But what Grossman also did is, well, he very prominently he cites Holman. He also cites Austin, Hayden, and Johnson. Well, Austin and Hayden are really interesting because Austin did a lot of work which proved that non-vital teeth are always infected. And I mean, it's that what Grossman did is he referred to one paragraph in an article that Austin wrote where one guy said he's not sure about whether coronary heart disease is related to oral foci, and just cited that, didn't say that. But if you look at the rest of the article, the whole article is saying, yeah, this is where these diseases are coming from, and particularly non-vital teeth, root canal teeth, and dead teeth. And what Austin actually did say was that of 89% of pulpless teeth were infected versus 4% of vital teeth, according to one method. And 96% of the vital teeth had zero growth versus 11% having zero growth and great amounts. So basically, Austin's work was showing that virtually all non-vital teeth are infected, and teeth that are vital may or may not be. It depends how, because a vital tooth can still be infected. It's not a question of whether or not a tooth is alive, it's a question of whether a tooth is infected. But so that was Austin. So what we have here is Grossman used partial information of Austin. Grossman throughout referred to Hayden as having done the definitive bacteriological work, even in his last 1988 book. Yeah, Hayden did do the definitive bacteriological work, and it fully supported Rosenau's work. And this was Hayden's work of 1,500 teeth, cleanly extracted teeth, where the differences were very, very large as far as the pulpless teeth. 87% were positively infected, and he didn't find much difference between those that showed up on x-rays or those that didn't. They were all infected. The vital teeth, he found there was a much lower percentage. And of course, some of them would be infected because, remember, they were vital. They weren't dead, but they could have been infected. But there was still a very dramatic difference between the vital teeth and the non-vital teeth. And Hayden's book concluded that you cannot do root canal therapy. This is not mentioned, of course. And this is Hayden's work on elective localization, which elective localization being these organisms electively locate in the same place that in a laboratory animal that they do in the person. And basically here he showed again the same results, essentially the same results as Rosenau, where this is a ratio here, specific versus other, whereas it goes for the same location versus it does not. Well, that in the case of kidney, 3 times as likely that this organism was going to cause kidney disease in an animal as an organism from somebody without kidney disease. In the case of endocardium, 4 times as likely. 4 times as likely with myocardium. These are heart conditions. In the case of eye disease, 65 times as likely, according to Hayden's work. So it's much more likely that the organism from the teeth with a person with a given disease would cause that disease in the laboratory animals as cause other diseases. Or organism from people with other diseases would cause those conditions. Did you follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
C.N. I'm sorry?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. C.N. Johnson, the most loved man in the dental profession. What's interesting is Johnson was a teacher of a friend of mine, Dr. George Meinig. Dr. George Meinig was one of the founding members of the Root Canal Association in 1943. And he has now come out vehemently against root canals. In fact, it's through Dr. Meinig that I was introduced to the dentists and doctors that I have lectured. And he found out about my work, and it is compatible with his. Well, it turns out, and I was talking to him, I says, you know, I think Johnson, there's this guy, C.N. Johnson was the guy. He said, well, Johnson was my teacher. He says, this was his beloved teacher. But he has come around to, and we have a shared opinion on this. Johnson was the president of the ADA in 1925, and then he served as editor until 1938. These are some quotes from Johnson. Shall we abandon our birthright? It's our birthright to work on teeth. If you know you're right, stand pan. He says, Hunter never referred in the remotest ways to the evil of pulpless teeth as such. Hunter talked about stumps, infected stumps of teeth. I mean, you know, you don't have to say exactly those words, but that's basically what he was talking about. Johnson's basic position was, I've had these patients for 30 years and they're okay. If we can't trust clinical evidence, we can't trust anything. And then this is his greatest statement of all time. The great lesson to be learned from our detractors is to ignore them. So what Johnson was saying was, ignore the information that contradicts what it is that we want to do. So, as I said, the three things were the fraud, C.N. Johnson, and the toothworm. And now we get into it of where we really are. The oldest, one of the oldest legends, and this is, certainly predates written records. It's in the records of Sumeria as far back as they go, but it's in the oral records going back as early as 5000 BC. That what's causing, if you have a toothache, if you get rid of the toothworm, that's what you want to do, is get rid of the toothworm, and then you can leave the rest of the structure. That's the mentality that goes way back. Now, when I came across the toothworm, really just in the last year, doing some more research, trying to figure out what's going on here, I remembered when a dentist I had taken out the contents of my root canal, the nerve, and it was dangling. I want to put, can I put it in the bottle? I want to save it. It looked like a worm. I want to save it, you know. He said, no, it's infected. You can't, you know. But he was dangling like a worm. And I said, oh, they're still thinking toothworm. That's where it's a toothworm against physiology, and we're still locked into the toothworm thing, of course. And all societies, Chinese, Indian, Japanese, they all have their toothworms. It goes all the way back. And Scribonius, 41 AD, talked about it. The Kuki Indians in Guatemala. Shakespeare, in Much Ado About Nothing. Don Pedro said, what? Aside from the toothache? Leonardo said, where is but humor or a worm? The toothworm. This is Bisoto the Fasting, the toothache demon of the Bosnian gypsies. So it's that thought that it's a worm that causes it. Now, and so if you get rid of the worm, you can keep the bony structure. Well, this guy was Pierre Fichard. He was a father of dentistry. And he argued, he says, he looked in a microscope, he said, I don't see any worms. He said, I don't think there's a toothworm. Well, he argued against it and supposedly disproved it, but he didn't disprove it because this is still the mentality that guides modern dentistry, is that you can do that kind of thing to a bony structure that's sticking out of your body. Fisher talked about it clearly what it is, and when you have a tooth or a bone that's sticking out of your body that's broken or that is somehow invaded, you've got a compound fracture. That's all there is to it. Every compromised tooth is a compound fracture, especially now when you've got a dead one and you've taken out the bone marrow, you've got a dead bone sticking out of your body, and that's not a good thing. Now, the other thing about Fichard is he also was adamant against mercury. This is 1726, 1746, and he said, he was talking about the enemies of the teeth. This is kind of funny. And he says, and he's talking about the enemies of the teeth and about how, you know, you chew on a rock or something and that's not good for your teeth. But he said, but by far the worst enemy of all is mercury, which the vulgar call quicksilver. Because once it's in the body, it goes for the teeth. And he's saying even the physicians who are most skilled in this, it's very, very dangerous. Now, this is 100 years before anybody even tried to put mercury into teeth. 100 years later, the Krakows came over from France or someplace, and they started putting mercury in teeth. And this was in the early 1800s. Well, there were the mercury amalgam wars back around 1840, 1830, 1840 to 50. Chapin Harris was one of the founders. He's considered one of the founders of modern dentistry. 1840, they founded the Baltimore School of College of Dentistry and so on. Harris and his associates were vehemently opposed to the use of mercury in teeth. And their first society, which is called the American Society of Dental Surgeons, was basically disbanded over this issue. The American Dental Association was a new dental association, and their people wanted to use mercury. And this was a battle that was fought. And by 1850, the ADA had won, and the American Society of Dental Surgeons was disbanded. The journal went on for a few years, but they were called the Mercury Amalgam Wars, and we're getting into those now again. But it's interesting that the first dental society of the U.S. and the founding father of dentistry in the U.S. was vehemently opposed, and the founding father of dentistry itself, vehemently opposed to the use of mercury. Well, Fouchard never even dreamed of it. I mean, that would be the most absurd thing. You don't want to get it on your skin. You certainly don't want to implant it into your body. Problem is, when it's annealed with silver, it's something you can smash into there and fill all the space, so we think, but of course it doesn't. And of course we know mercury's bad from reading Alice in Wonderland. The problem isn't just mercury, though. We have to realize that if we use the same analogy as the finger, if indeed the tooth is more like this last joint in the finger than something like a rock, then if we clean out the infection, we get into the bone, we clean out that infection totally, and we fill it with something that looks just like fingernail. It's perfect. But it's not going to heal because it doesn't get any oxygen. It can't heal. You seal it off. And the tooth is the same. So if you have any teeth that have fillings in them, just be aware that this is the same principle. And as soon as you fill them, you cannot heal. Fisher talked about this quite a bit in his book, Death and Dentistry. The book is available from the American Academy of Biological Dentistry. I spoke to Carol Arana just recently. And they had actually turned me on to the book, and then I read it and made it the centerpiece of my last talk there. A year ago, some of the dentists said, you shouldn't talk about Fisher because basically if you really get into the physiology of it, if you get away from the toothworm and think of the tooth as a physiological extension of our other bones, then you can't do that kind of thing. You can't go cleaning it out. If you let it heal, then maybe you could put something on top, at least get it some. But if you got this wound, open wound, and you fill it with something, no matter how sterile, it won't heal. So this is a real important thing to keep in mind in our own life as well. Now I'm going to go back to root canals for a minute. I wanted to emphasize that because the problem isn't just root canals, but while we're looking at root canals, we can see here that, for example, root canal procedures from 79 to 1990 doubled. Throughout the years, they've gone up. This is the number of patients. And extractions have basically gone down. In the same period of time, we can see that if you look at the statistics for cancer, we have a cancer epidemic. And these are increased. I know I've heard something about some of the more recent data says that it's kind of slowing down. I'm not sure. I haven't seen the data. I'll have to look at it. But these are increases. Prostate cancer from 1973 to 92, increasing at 4.6% per year. That's like really compounded. 4.6% it's a large figure. So that these are percentage changes, annual percentage changes, and I don't think it's strictly an accident that we have these increases in cancer as we have these increases in root canal therapy, so-called root canal therapy. And we can start to understand it even logically if we think of like, okay, well, if the oral focus is responsible for stomach ulcers, and stomach cancer follows stomach ulcers, you can start to see that if we go to the end stage of tooth disease, being the dead tooth that we're going to keep in the mouth, it starts to be easy to understand how that would encourage the end state of the secondary disease that was caused by this in the first place. I am reasonably, and Rosenau did do some tests early with leukemia and later with carcinoma, not a lot, but enough to show that the reactions, he was doing agglutination, cross-agglutination tests and so on, that he was getting the same types of reactions with cancer as he did with his other things. So I think we're going to see that these do relate. Now, some of the folks I know, they're really out against all the dentists, and they're not all bad. Thomas Hartzell he was a president of the ADA in 1921. He did one study that he and his associate Enrique, they were kind of shocked by the result, and what they did is they had a small number, about 20 teeth of people. See, it was he was looking for an organism in the root of teeth, and people that had healthy, he took some, when they were taking out some teeth for different reasons, he got some healthy teeth and some teeth that had either caries or gum disease. And he found in the teeth that had caries or gum disease, the majority of cases, an organism was already in the root, even though, I mean, it was varying stages of infection, but sometimes very little. But in those that had no gum disease or no tooth decay, the organism, there was nothing, it was zero, and the same procedure. And he thought that was so striking that they went and they published this. And I haven't seen anybody do some work on this since, but what it means is that invasion of the root is a long drawn out process, and the question is, at what stage of this infection can you stop it? When can you heal it? Because once it's through into the dentin, it's not going to heal unless we do something that we're not doing now. So we don't know, but it is a long drawn out process, and the frightening thing about it is that it's possible that once you get through the enamel into the dentin, given our present state of knowledge, the two choices are either you clean it out, hollow it out so that it's kind of smooth, and see if you can get it to gloss over, and don't eat any sugar because the sugar is going to get to it through your system anyway. It doesn't have to just come through the teeth. And don't eat any white flour, and just eat fresh, keep it totally clean and rinse it with heavy salt solutions. Maybe you can get it to gloss over, and then you won't have this problem. Otherwise, given what we eat and so on, and our present state of knowledge that we still don't know how to heal teeth, there may be once you get a cavity, you may have lost your tooth, and the smartest thing to do might be to get rid of it before you get some other disease, and just realize that we're just caught. We're in this position now. We know these things cause different diseases. We're culturally, we're at a point where we're very dependent on white flour and sugar, so we're gonna get tooth decay, but we just still don't know how to heal them. We don't know how to grow new teeth. The next step is going to have to be cloning teeth, growing teeth, or learning how to heal them in place. We're not there yet. So the smartest thing is, okay, so let's develop good type of artificial teeth until we can get rid of the rest of the problem, because at least that way we're not going to have to deal with these diseases. Newton Thomas was another guy who was an assistant editor at the Journal of ADA. He wrote some of the right things, and he disappeared. He was like history. Weston Price was a dentist who did many animal experiments, totally validated Rosenau's work. He was the head of the dental, it was the Research Institute at the ADA, and his stuff hit too close to home, and the institute was abolished and the work was farmed out in 1922, and there was quite a bit of contention, but Price is a real hero. Then he went on, he wrote a book called Oral Infections and Systemic Disease. His book is being made available through Price Pottinger Foundation in San Diego. He then did studies and traveled around to the different primitive tribes and saw that before the white man's trading post came in, these people did not have infections of the teeth. They did not have chronic diseases. And he would go to visit them later, and after the trading post came in, they began to have infection, they began to have chronic diseases. George Miney basically was on the board of Price Pottinger, found out about Price's work in this area. He was on the board as a nutritionist, found out about Price's work, and then based on that wrote his book called Root Canal Cover-Up. As long ago as 1913, that's what, 87 years ago, Charles Mayo, one of the founders of the Mayo Foundation, and he was the intellectual one. He said the next great step in medical progress in the line of preventive medicine should be made by the dentist. The question is, will they do it? It almost has to be the dentist because they're the only ones that have the tools to go in and clean up the mess. So we'll be nice to the dentist. Now, just a couple, we just got 2 more slides. And, but this one's kind of important because as you study Western medicine, if you study to the extent that we do study Western medicine, we have this concept of autoimmunity. The concept of autoimmunity developed in the 30s and subsequently, and was particularly popularized by a fellow named Ivan Reut. And what we have to understand is all the diseases that were categorized as autoimmune diseases are diseases that Rosenau had earlier showed are caused by an organism. So because Rosenau's work was being ignored, somebody came up with this concept of autoimmunity. Paul Ehrlich, who's one of the real giants of immunology, he had said it's impossible. There can't be such a thing. Horror autotoxicus. And what's incredible was that some of the people have referred to Ehrlich as being the first one to propose autoimmunity. Ehrlich said it's impossible. Then Reut and Doniak was 1956 that they had this model for multiple sclerosis, which again, Rosenau did a lot of work on bacteriology of multiple sclerosis. But they were proposing a different model based on, it was encephalitis, some type of an animal encephalitis. And that's the model that has developed into what now is the autoimmune concept. Reut went on and wrote the book Immunology, which was a very popular textbook, very popular immunology textbook. So some of the comments about autoimmunity was that Witebsky, 67, proof is missing. Wilson said it escapes your grasp. Even Reut said it's very complicated. 1985, they said it's a black box. So autoimmunity is a theory. The problem with it is that, number one, it's a theory based on something that it's superfluous, because Rosenau showed that there is a cause for these diseases. But what's more frightening is now our modern concepts of immunology are based on this flawed concept. So the implications are fairly large. I mean, I looked at that, I said, oh, that means like what you're reading about immunology, maybe it's not, maybe there's something wrong with that. So we do have to question here's Reut's book, Essential Immunology, 1977. A whole generation of MDs learned their immunology from somebody who was basing it on autoimmunity, which is a bogus, superfluous, unnecessary concept. Then we got the thing of human experiments. All these clinical trials. What are clinical trials? They're experiments with humans. Run these experiments on animals. If you've got something that works, do it on animals. So I have a real big problem with the whole clinical trial thing. I think it's just, there's something wrong with that. And now we have this other thing called mouse models. Well, mouse models, they're developing kind of mouses that might mimic different diseases. You don't need mouse models. You take your average mouse. Rosenau could use a mouse, a rabbit, anything. If you get the right organism that really is causing the disease, you get that specific organism, inject it in your everyday laboratory animal, it's going to get the disease. So the problem why this whole concept of mice models was developed, the problem with giving a disease to a mouse is that you don't have the right organism. So if you get the right organism, the whole concept of mouse models is bogus. So all of these things, which are very central to modern medicine, really are deserving of re-examination in the light of this work. Are there any questions?